kill anyone for money, completely mad, no morality, no conscience whatsoever.
It was Wild West territory up on Lygon Street back in those days, and he was the baddest hombre of the lot at that time.
They were both the same sort of calibre. Always wanted to show their guns. They wanted to stand out amongst everyone.
This is the story of Christopher Dale Flannery, Mr. Rent-A-Kill, and Alphonse Gangitano, the Black Prince of Lygon Street. Two flashy sociopaths linked by a love of crime and power, a rotting body, and the convenient death of a witness. They shared a callous indifference for human life, each man building a brand around their notoriety for ultra-violence. Are sociopaths born or created? In this episode of Suburban Gangsters, we explore that question through the life and crimes of Christopher Dale Flannery and Alphonse Gangitano. While they share a similar criminal DNA, their path to infamy could not be more different. Ultimately, they stepped beyond the norms of the criminal world. They became liabilities for their gangster mates that could no longer be ignored.
In your home?
Yes.
Do you know who shot you?
Yes.
Can you tell me who that was?
Chris Flannery was the person who shot me at my house that evening.
The man who shot New South Wales detective Michael Drury was born in 1948 in the working-class suburb of Brunswick, Melbourne. His alcoholic and abusive father deserted the family home when Chris was just 9 years old. By age 14, he was regularly in trouble with the law. He was sent to Morning Star, a juvenile detention centre run by Franciscan monks who used corporal punishment to keep their charges in line.
To try and eliminate the floggings that these Catholics, and the friars were Catholics, would give him, he tattooed a boob tattoo of a crucifix across his back, shoulder to shoulder, neck to arse. Horrific, this incredible boob tattoo of a crucifix. And of course, the first time I saw it was when we were in prison. And I said, mate, what in the hell did you get that for? He said, oh, Ray, he said, you wouldn't believe how bad they were. He said, I was terrified of them. I'm not scared to admit it. So I thought if I got this crucifix tattooed across my back, they'd stop flogging me. I said, oh, that's pretty smart, mate. What happened? He said, when they saw it, he said, they gave me the thrashing of my life.
Flannery remained defiant, and the thrashings became a part of life in Morning Star. The brutality was deliberate and organised, an attempt to break his resistance.
It was one of these situations where that if you didn't knuckle down, the guy or the guys who were nominated by the friars would flog you to bring you into line, and they were usually 5 or 6 years older than you. Now, it's turned out that Chris could hold his own against these kids, and ultimately he finished up flogging the main guy that they were using at the time. But he was a different type of character, Chris. When the friars wanted Chris to take that guy's place, he refused to. Now, that gave him an incredible status, even at a young age, for, first of all, being strong enough to walk alone, but then not being prepared to go on and become a standover over other kids who were his friends. And that put him in a special category. That transferred to when he went to prison. He had the same approach and the same attitude in prison.
Age 19, Flannery was sent to Pentridge Prison for a string of violent offences, including rape. Again, he refused to submit to the rules and was transferred to H Division, a section of the jail designed to break the will of even the hardest core criminals.
The guards who ran H Division were bashers and sadists. They subjected the inmates to the worst kind of physical and mental brutality.
I'm the first to admit it, I was terrified of the place. Everyone was terrified of H Division. It was a bad place. Anyway, he went down there and he took them all on, offered all the screws to fight him one out, which they wouldn't, of course. They flogged him again and what have you, and he refused to obey any orders. And then he challenged everyone else in the division to back him up. Let's destroy this place. If we don't obey their rules and regulations, what can they do to us? And no one, not one other person, there were some pretty heavy crims and some very, very well-known people who refused to be involved. So he was one out.
Beaten but not broken, he continued to defy authorities, stripping naked and going on a hunger strike. His brother, a respected lawyer, alerted the media to the torturous conditions within H Division. The publicity helped bring about a formal inquiry. After publication, little changed, but the most sadistic prison officers were retired. Years of systemic cruelty and abuse created the monster that defined Flannery's psyche. The horrors of H Division had turned a minor criminal into a cold-hearted thug. In 1972, Flannery was released 4 years early. Now free, Rentokil's most heinous crimes were yet to come. While sociopath Christopher Dale Flannery was doing time in Pentridge Prison, a teenage boy by the name of Alphonse John Gangitano was watching Al Capone movies and dreaming of becoming a gangster.
Other kids had kiss posters on their walls. He had Marlon Brando as Vito Corleone. I mean, that's all he ever wanted to be. He was a gangster.
He was a private school boy, posh, Italian, sort of like wannabe gangster. His mum and dad had money. They bought him and his sister a pizza parlour.
Even at school, the call would come over the loudspeaker, Alphonse Gangitano, report to the headmaster's office. He'd driven the car to school and left it parked in one of the teachers' parking spots. You know, he was that kind of a bloke. He was pretty brazen up front, knew how to fight, but was a real smart ass. And as soon as you met him as a bloke, you'd say, I don't like this prick.
Well, Gangitano used to hang around gyms. He was pretty handy himself. He could fight like a thrashing machine. He used to knock around with a lot of hoods and thugs and they'd help him out, but he could fight a bit himself.
Before long, Gangitano attracted police attention. He ran with a gang of thugs, bashing people in the streets as he sought to establish turf like the gangsters he'd seen in the movies. He set out to attract the attention, if not the respect, of Melbourne's most notorious criminals.
I was the first bloke to ever give him a sawed-off shotgun. When I was 19, he was 16 and a half when I was 19. I gave him a sawed-off shotgun, a 12 gauge. It had a pistol grip. You broke it open, just one shell down there, and you close it up. It was beautiful, a sawed-off shotgun. My old man gave it to me, and I gave it to Alphonse when I got a handgun. And Alphonse thought it was great, you know.
Gangitano could never have imagined that his friendship with Chopper would one day turn sour, and that the man who gave him his first gun would try to kill him. But before that day of reckoning came, Gangitano pursued his gangster status by targeting off-duty cops.
He and his thugs, usually 3 or 4 of them, would go to nightclubs and they'd give the off-duty police officer a fearful hiding. Put him in hospital for 2 or 3 months, sometimes worse. One of Gangitano's main MOs, he hated police, and that's how he squared up.
One of Victoria Police's toughest detectives, Brian Murphy, had a run-in with Gangitano over the bashing of an off-duty cop enjoying a night out.
I heard about it, and they came in to Mickey's Disco one night, and I rang the St Kilda police and I said, if you're looking for Alphonse and his mates, I said, they're here and I'll keep them here until you come and get them. Well, a couple of carloads of uniform men came down, they took them away and they were back within about an hour. Because on that particular night they had a pocket full of money. I believe they were relieved of that money, and they came back and they said, you're a nice cunt, did you put us in for belting up the St Kilda cop? I said, yeah. He said, why'd you do that? I said, because I'm a fucking policeman and they wanted you.
While Gangitano bashed police, Christopher Flannery was on the run from them. On bail for armed robbery in Victoria, he absconded to Perth, where he got his first and probably only regular job working in the men's department in David Jones. But it wasn't long before he returned to his old ways and robbed the place at gunpoint, injuring a guard in the process. He was eventually caught by police and sent to jail for another 3 years. When Flannery was released from prison this time, he and Gangitano would cross paths. Two notorious sociopaths, Chris Flannery and Alphonse Gangitano, are soon to cross paths.
I describe him as having a split personality. He's the sort of person that at times could charm the leaves off the trees, and other times could be quite psychotic.
Gangitano could switch in a second. People talk of Alphonse, 1 minute all happy, friendly, next minute he's bashing someone with a bottle. You know, he was that kind of character. Melbourne, Victoria. Today it's ranked as the 5th safest city in the world, a city of art, fashion and cafe culture. But there is another Melbourne you won't find in the tourist marketing. It's controlled and run by a powerful criminal underworld that enforces its will with fear and violence. The ruling factions and the names may change, but the city has always been divided into criminal territories. In the 1970s, beachside St Kilda attracted louts and villains from across town. Mickey's Disco was a favourite St Kilda hangout for Melbourne's criminal underworld.
Criminals from as far as Darwin, Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide, Perth, everybody visited there. It was just the right place to be in those years.
It was here that Chris Flannery and Alphonse Gangitano would meet. Fresh from jail and with limited job opportunities, Flannery accepted an offer to work as a bouncer for the disco. To that point, Flannery had been a dismal failure as a crook.
He pulled aside his old mate Alan Williams, and he told Williams, he said, look, I'm no good at this. I'm no good at crime. I think what I'm going to do is kill people for a living. And that's pretty much how Rent-A-Kill Incorporated started. It was a murder-for-hire business designed by Flannery because he was no good at anything else.
Murder, he believed, was easier to get away with. His sales pitch was simple. For $50,000, he'd kill anyone.
I mean, Flannery was the only person I've ever heard of that ran around saying, oh, I'm going to kill people for money. I am a hitman. I'm going to kill people for money. In fact, call me rent-a-kill.
On February 1st, 1980, solicitor Roger Wilson disappeared. He dabbled in some business deals with the wrong sort of investors. When they didn't get their money, they put a contract out on him. And who better for the job than Rent-a-Kill? Brian Murphy got word that Wilson was a marked man and rang the homicide squad.
I rang the homicide and they said, well, have you got a body? I said, no. I said, you've got to be fucking joking. He said, no, I'm not actually. He says, but when you get a body, you ring us. So we told one another to get fucked, and on our way we went.
Mr Wilson was last seen here at the factory premises at the corner of Currajong Street and Robbs Road in Footscray on Friday night. He was working late with other company executives evaluating a new product. He is said to have been very enthused by the product and was in high spirits.
Flannery and an accomplice grabbed Roger Wilson as he left his business, pretended they were police officers. They handcuffed him, they put him in the back of the car, they drove him away to a remote location. While he was handcuffed, he sought to escape. He knew by that stage what was going to hit him. Flannery charged off after him, emptied the entire revolver into him, killed him and buried him.
Burying the body was a rookie mistake. Bodies have a habit of being found. However, if Wilson's body was never found, Flannery and his accomplices would be in the clear. At this time, Gangitano, now 22, was hanging around Mickey's disco, ingratiating himself with his criminal elders.
Alphonse Gangitano admired Flannery, who to him as a street fighting man would have been an A-lister when he was an up-and-comer.
Flannery used that to his advantage and gave Gangitano a job that would test his mettle. It was up to Gangitano and one or two others. They were sent up there to where this body was buried. They dug it up, must have been a grisly job of itself, and reburied it in another spot.
Probationary role for him.
Yeah, he was showing to Flannery that he had the dash. He was showing that, you know, that he could do what had to be done, and he certainly developed that reputation. Gangitano told people later that that was the most disgusting thing he'd ever done in his life. The media got wind that Flannery was the hitman and confronted him.
You are obviously very much aware of rumours which linked you with certain incidents in Melbourne several months ago.
Yes.
It was being rumoured that you had been retained as a hitman.
Oh, that's incredible. Just rubbish.
You have heard these, though?
Yes,
And what's your answer to that?
it's just ridiculous. Totally untrue.
Can you tell us how you came to be connected with Mark Clarkson and with Roger Wilson?
Well, Mr Clarkson gave us some advice on a business nature through a discotheque that we were having sort of trouble with. And he came to advise us, and we had a meeting, and Mr Wilson turned up at the meeting. And that's the only time I've seen Mr Wilson.
Wilson's body was never found, but police believed they had enough evidence to prosecute. Their case rested on the testimony of Deborah Boundy. She'd overheard Flannery and her boyfriend, Kevin Williams, describing Wilson's murder in detail. Flannery wanted her gone, and he had just the man for the job.
He liked to sit Sheila's down with a bag of pure. She would overdose with pure Chinese white. She killed herself. They just supplied the heroin for her, the pure for her, and sat there and watched her do it.
Her death achieved its aim. Without a witness, the case collapsed and Flannery walked free from court. And Gangitano was now a man to be reckoned with.
I had seen him explode on occasions. I've seen him, and he just grabbed this bloke by the hair, shoved him up against the wall of that theatre, and shoved this gun into his mouth so violently that it pushed all his teeth out and split his lip. He just became a demon. He was that ready to go that the adrenaline, you know, was just seeping out of him, and he'd got to that rattling stage, you know, and there's only one stage after that. It's usually a really loud explosion.
Minutes after walking free from court over the murder of Roger Wilson, Flannery was arrested and extradited to New South Wales to face another murder charge. A Sydney brothel owner turned up dead, and Flannery was the chief suspect.
Flannery was acquitted of this murder, but remained in Sydney. But in that time that he was here, having to report to the police, of course, this is when all this mayhem started up. And I don't know, it was like just trouble. Everywhere he went, there was trouble. Trouble. Like he was just stirring the pot.
With his family now relocated to Sydney, Rent-A-Kill was on the hunt for work. He accepted a contract to hit a drug dealer named Terence Basham and his partner Susan Smith. It was his most heinous and callous crime.
39-year-old Terence Basham and his 30-year-old de facto wife Susan were in the lounge room of their home at Stoker's Siding on Friday night when someone came through their back door. The intruder shot both at point-blank range through the head and body. Their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, was left unharmed.
The distraught toddler was found hugging her parents' lifeless bodies when their murders were discovered the next day.
In many ways, he was the rather true sociopath. He had very little regard for the well-being of other people. And this is quite a disturbing psychological trait to have. He would often brag amongst other people of the crimes he'd been involved in over the years. But I think a lot of people in Sydney, in the organised crime world, realised also that Chris Flannery, being the homicidal maniac that he was, could not be trusted by anyone. He had no loyalty to any individual or crime group.
Sydney crime boss George Freeman saw a need to keep this cold-blooded killer on a tight leash and put him on the payroll. But even Freeman couldn't keep Rent-A-Kill under control. When Flannery attempted to murder a policeman, the shooting sent a shockwave through the underworld.
Chris Flannery was the person who shot me at my house that evening.
The detective, a senior constable, had been standing at the kitchen sink of his Chatswood home shortly after 6 o'clock this evening when 2 shots were fired through the window. He was rushed to the Royal North Shore Hospital in a critical condition.
It's widely believed that Flannery tried to kill him to help a mate beat drugs charges brought against him by Drury. Cops had always been off limits. Rent-A-Kill had truly crossed a line, and his gangster mates knew something had to be done.
He did all his fighting in packs. He never fought anyone on his own. He did all his fighting with people with him. He pistol whipped people, you know, with a fully loaded gun. And when someone's getting pistol whipped with a fully loaded gun, they don't fight you back.
Having crossed the threshold to murder with the killing of Deborah Boundy, Gangitano's sense of self-importance rapidly inflated.
You'd see a car pull up, nice new Mercedes-Benz or whatever, and poor driver would get out of the car and Alphonse would just walk up to him and say, "That's a nice car, mate. Give us the keys." you know who I am? I'm Alphonse Gangitano. He'd jump in the car and drive off. He'd take the cars for 3, 4, 5 months. No one ever reported, of course, because they'd look into it. And, yeah, look, it was Alphonse Gangitano. No point reporting that one to the coppers.
Full of bravado, Gangitano felt invincible. So much so, he took on his old mate, Chopper Reed.
He bashed me at the Dover Hotel. He knew that one day that would come back and bite him on the arse. You can't bash someone like me, you know.
You were said to be walking around, dynamite strapped to you?
Yeah, well, that was only one occasion. I went up and looked for him at his at the gambling club he was at. I had a stick of gelignite in my mouth, and I had some dynamite strapped down the front of me, and with detonators in it and everything, you know. He pushed his way out through the toilet window and landed on the roof of a Mercedes, and then hurt his back.
Why did you go to war with Alphonse?
With Alphonse, because I just wanted to show everybody what a weak prick he was, you know. So that proved to people how much gut and dash he had, you know.
Gangitano might have worn expensive Italian suits and projected an image of wealth, but he had a crippling gambling addiction and mounting debt. He believed he could make some serious coin through boxing and an up-and-coming fighter named Lester Ellis.
I first started sparring with Lester when he was 12 and I was 22. He particularly impressed me because he attacked me fearlessly and with ability, and for a novice. And I got out the ring and I said, "Who is this kid?" And they said, "His name's Lester Ellis." And basically got to know him, and I said, "This kid's going to be a world champion."
Michael's prediction was right. Ellis had a meteoric rise, winning his first world title championship at the age of 19. A year later, when Michael challenged Ellis for the title, Gangitano planned to bet heavily on Ellis.
Gangitano rang me and said, "Do you need more tickets for the fight?" This was about a month out from the fight. And I said, "Alphonse," I said, "stop backing him." I said, "Today I made the weight and I've sparred 15 rounds with 4 opponents." And he said, "Barry," he said, "I love you like a brother. You and Les love Lester like a brother. I'm not betting against either of you." And I said, "Alphonse, I know you're backing Lester. Stop backing Lester. He can't beat me."
It's been a good round for Michael. A good left to the head, a left into the body.
Even before the decision was announced, it was obvious to everyone who'd won, even Michael and Ellis.
Keith Ellis. He's the new IBF World Junior Lightweight Champion.
Alphonse lost a lot of money on the fight and sought retribution. With the help of his cronies, he attacked Barry Michael in a nightclub.
I've turned around for the first time and I'm surrounded. And the first thing I thought was, I'm off. There was at least 8 guys surrounding me with death in their eyes. I knew they carried guns. I turned to Alphonse and I said, "You effing so-and-so, you've set me up." I was wearing a suit and tie, and he just lunged at me and he grabbed me by the lapels of my jacket and pulled me down on the couch with him. And as he pulled me down the couch with him, he latched onto my right cheek with his teeth, and he got a serious grip on my cheek. And I got my hands up trying to gouge his eyes to get him off me, and immediately they were like a pack of mongrel dogs on top of me, bashing me and biting me. I had bite marks on my back. My nose was smashed. That scar on the bridge of my nose is from that evening. It was smashed right across under my left eye. It was a really serious break. Eventually I remember someone saying, "He's had enough, he's had enough." The next thing I know, I'm being dragged through the crowd with blood spraying everywhere off my face and people screaming, and basically getting to the front door and just being pushed out into the street.
Michael's nose was badly broken. He had just one more fight in his career, and because he couldn't breathe through his nose anymore, he had to give it away.
It was yet another example of Gangitano's capacity for violence, a trait that would ultimately result in his own death.
The criminal sociopath, some of them may actually be born with a gene which makes them much more susceptible or likely to turn to crime. On the other hand, there are some born and raised in wonderfully socialised families where you'd never expect, with all their advantages in life, that they would turn to crime. It may be genetic, it may be environmental, but it's almost like their future is doomed, that they'll go down the slippery slope of crime and they'll enjoy it thoroughly.
The beginning of Christopher Flannery and Alphonse Gangitano's journeys into crime were very different, but where they ended up was the same.
Chris Flannery told a number of people if he was arrested for my shooting, he was going to roll over and tell the truth on everyone. And there were some significant organised crime figures that couldn't guarantee their own safety. And they were in the same camp as Chris Flannery. So in their mind, he had outlived his usefulness.
Christopher Flannery's Sydney house was peppered with bullets. They smashed through windows, splintered aluminium cladding and shattered brickwork. But of the 30 shots fired, only 2 found their target.
Bullets narrowly missed his wife and daughter, but Flannery suffered wounds to his hand and his ear. The hitman was now the target and turned to drugs to stay on high alert.
Flannery had been taking cocaine and speed most of his life, most of his adult life, but in the last 3 months of his life, he was taking cocaine virtually 10, 20 times a day. It was known that he was not sleeping, he hadn't slept, possibly for 2 or 3 weeks before the day of his disappearance, and obviously would be suffering sleep deprivation, forms of psychosis, that sort of thing.
It's never been proved, but it's widely believed that George Freeman ordered the hit.
George Freeman was a very cunning man. Flannery was still employed as his minder stroke standover man. Flannery and George Freeman used to regularly take a sauna together. And on one of these occasions when they were having a sauna together, Freeman casually mentioned to Flannery that he had access to a high-powered machine pistol, and in fact said to Flannery, "Are you interested?" And of course he registered a positive response, and that was it. Ultimately, Flannery went to Freeman's home, and what we've been told is during the course of the conversation there were 2 other people at the house, and Freeman went and retrieved the machine pistol. So Flannery fully expected a gun to be presented to him in his presence, but what he did not expect was to be shot with the same firearm.
The power in Sydney decided that Christopher Flannery should go for the sake of peace in a funny kind of way. The man who killed for a living ended up like the Virgin for the Incas, heart bled, so that the harvest would be better the next year.
Mrs. Flannery, thanks for coming in. What has happened to your husband?
My husband's dead.
How do you know?
Because I know he's been murdered.
How do you know that?
Well, he left our apartment on Thursday at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, and he has never returned and never been seen since. He's dead.
On legal advice, George Freeman was saying very little about his visit from the police.
They're saying that Flannery was on his way out to see you.
I don't know what they're saying.
Yeah.
And that I'll make no comment.
Just say you had nothing to do with his death.
I had nothing. Is he dead?
Well, I don't know.
Is he dead?
Police seem to think he might be.
And that? Well, I don't know that.
Flannery's body has never been found, but the reign of rent-a-kill came to an abrupt end on May 9, 1985. 10 years later, Alphonse Gangitano found himself heading down the same slippery slope. Like Flannery, Gangitano habitually used cocaine. And while Alphonse dabbled in the trade, he was more of a consumer than a supplier, and soon suffered from drug-induced paranoia. On December 19, 1995, he and his mate Jason Moran were attempting to extort money from the Sports Bar nightclub in Melbourne. Then Gangitano snapped. Using pool cues and a metal bar, he savagely bashed the club's patrons. Former homicide detective Charlie Bazina worked on some of Victoria's highest profile criminal cases.
Alphonse's unpredictability was the catalyst for that assault, which embroiled Jason into it, which he didn't want to be a part of. But once it all started, he supported Alphonse and put himself in the position of going back to jail and subsequently got convicted.
In January 1998, Gangitano appeared at court for a mention on the affray charges.
The court heard that 4 people were hospitalised with injuries, including a fractured nose, cuts, bruises, a fractured jaw and permanent eye damage. Mr Gangitano was then granted bail with a $10,000 surety, a night curfew and an order to seek psychiatric treatment.
Rumours that Gangitano was going to plead guilty rippled through the underworld. This would leave Jason Moran facing a certain jail sentence. Gangitano should have learnt from Flannery's mistake. Threatening to turn on your mates seldom works out well. Brian Murphy heard that Gangitano was in the crosshairs and went to warn him.
We got over there and Alphonse was sitting there like a lord of the manor. He clicked his fingers and this little puppet with a ponytail comes running over and he opens a cigarette. Fair dinkum, he lived B-grade films. And the bloke put a cigarette in his mouth and lit it and he go out of the way. And I said to him, listen, you know you're well and surely going to get knocked. I said, you've robbed all your mates and that's what led to his demise. And he said, there's no fucking way I'm going to get knocked. He said, they're my buddies.
Crime figure Alphonse Gangitano was gunned down in his Templestowe home. His wife found him lying in a pool of blood in the laundry. He'd been shot 3 times in the head and body. His killer has not been found.
There seems to have been a decision to, as they say in the underworld, tug his coat. Graham Kinnerborough was a well-known mediator. He was renowned for resolving things without violence. It's alleged that he and Jason Moran went to Gangitano's house in Templestowe for a discussion. Former homicide detective Charlie Bazina was assigned to investigate Gangitano's murder.
Indications are he then walked into the house. It's obviously well known to Alphonse. He was allowed in, and Alphonse greeted him at the door in his underpants. Anyone else or someone that Alphonse didn't know certainly wouldn't have been allowed access. I believe at that stage that Jason Moran had pulled a pistol, shot Alphonse. Now what that argument was over, we'll never ever know. He was shot several times in his underpants in his laundry. Hardly a glorious end for the gangster that he'd like to have been known as. No one was ever charged with his murder. There's a saying in the Melbourne underworld, we catch and kill our own. Flannery and Gangitano should have faced society's justice for their crimes, but instead they faced the judgment of their criminal peers, and the sentence could only ever be death. Their departure restored balance in their criminal networks, but it would not last. Few but their families and a handful of friends mourn their loss.